Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Bible 365, and I am your host, Kathy Carter. 365 means we are reading through the Bible in 365 days using the 1-year chronological Bible reading plan, and that is available online at oneyearbible.com. So you would go on oneyearbible.com, you would go under their chronological reading plans and download their free reading plan in a year. Following along with me, reading first, and then coming here second to hear maybe just to confirm what you were thinking, or maybe to get a little more information, or maybe to just get some personal testimonies. So sometimes I just kind of get on a soapbox and I talk about things that really affect or impact my life according to what I'm reading in the scriptures. So the whole point and purpose for reading these scriptures is to get a closer relationship with God. Your outward stuff, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because I feel like this is the kind of stuff that we say all the time. Your outward stuff doesn't matter if your inside stuff hasn't changed. So the point and purpose of loving God is to allow him to change everything that's going on the inside to appear more in his image and less in our own image, right? So to find this place where we recognize that God is truth, God is love, God is creation, right? Like God is anything and everything that we can possibly imagine that he is. And once we recognize that, like that we're not that we haven't provided that he has provided that for us, then we recognize what else he has provided. And those are kind of those barriers and barricades to keep us in a place where we are working with the rest of the world in order to make it a place that is more like him. So even, I was just going to say, a more functional place or a better place. And that's actually not necessarily the truth either. It's really just a place to draw people closer to him. So the point of being on this globe, as it were, after the fall, is to for all of us to recognize God, to love God more, and to get closer to him and be more like him. Like that's really the whole point and purpose. Even today, he says, I'm going to do this so you know that it's me, right? And so it's not because he is a pompous God, and it's not because he's like, look how amazing I am. It's because he created the world, and since he created the world, he created the way the world works. And so if we all recognize that, then we will all work better harmony with each other, right? And then that will help bring on what is to come, which I believe what is to come, I'm hoping we're going to find out more of that in the future, but I believe at this point what is to come is going to be a better, more perfect place, a place without the fall of sin, right? Without Satan dwelling in and among and around us, being able to whisper in our ears, right? Without that evil component, right? Which is what we got in the fall. Okay, that was a long-winded beginning. So I'm not going to go over the whiteboard, but I have that image yesterday of kind of where we are in the book of Kings. All of it being said is Saul was the first king of Israel. I keep saying David was the first king of Israel. He was not. Saul was the first king of Israel, but he messed up really, really, really badly. And then David was the king that God, Saul was after his own heart. And so he pulled him out and he made him king over the tribes of Israel, all the 12 tribes. David, Solomon, it split. And now we are kind of going down the line of kings in Judah and kings in Israel. And this is really a heavy focus on the king of Israel, which is Ahab. Ahab is a terrible king, not because he does dirty to the people, but because he has turned his heart away from God. He actually never, I don't think, has turned towards God. So he knows God, but he is not following God, right? He is following other gods. And we find that out yesterday. He marries this woman named Jezebel, and he follows Baal, who is her god, right? The god of her people. And he follows that god and completely turns away from the other god, worships that god, does all that God asks, right? So this is really where, not that he doesn't know that the Lord exists, because he's still in the tribe, one of the tribes of Israel. But sorry, I need to hit a button. But he's not following that Lord, right? So he essentially probably doesn't really know the real Lord, but he knows that Israel has a God. Okay. And that's just a guess, because I feel like once you really know who he is, it's kind of impossible not to follow him, because you recognize how good he is. Okay. So today is, I'm sorry, I never even gave our days and all that kind of stuff. Today is day 163. It is June 11th. And we are going over 1 Kings 17:8 through 20:22. So it's kind of like a middle of the chapter to a middle of the chapter. And this is all about Elijah and Ahab. a little bit about Jezebel as well, but we'll get more about her tomorrow. But Elijah and Ahab. So we're just going to start with Elijah was, if you guys remember yesterday, when we left off yesterday, Elijah had just been picked. He ran up to King Ahab and was essentially like, hey, just so you know, it's not going to rain again until I say so. And of course, as we know, water makes the world go round. If it doesn't rain, there's no food, right? There's no water, there's no food, there are no crops, there's no harmony among people because everybody is scrambling to get the best of, right? So there's probably infighting and there's all kinds of bad things that happen when there is a famine. They probably also heavily depend on their leadership, which is King Ahab. So this is what's going on in the nation in which they're living right now, which is the northern kingdom, Israel, 10 tribes. So we're going to go to verse 8. Elijah is right now, he was at that brook. Ravens were feeding him because he ran. It says, then the word of the Lord. I had speech issues all day yesterday, and hopefully I won't have them all day today, but I'm already starting. Then the word of the Lord came to him. Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I've directed a widow there to supply you with food. Okay, so he's going to this area. Which is, so he's really north in the kingdom of Israel. So remember, Israel is split north and south, and like quite literally, like if you look at a map, Israel is kind of everything above, and Judah is everything below, like in the bottom nation of Israel. And so Elijah is living up in the north, and then he goes actually even a little bit further north and goes and meets this widow there. So he has run away, and now the food is run out, the brook is dried up, and so God tells him to go to this widow, and then this widow is going to feed you. Well, he goes to this widow, and so I want to make this note that at this point it's been in the neighborhood, right? Not exact numbers because I don't know how long Ahab has been ruling, but it's been in the neighborhood of 66 years since Solomon ruled. So it's been a massive chunk of time. This is a woman with a young son. She's a widow, but she has a young son. I'm thinking it's likely that she maybe is in her 20s, right? And I'm making this point because she doesn't really know Solomon. She likely doesn't really necessarily know the Lord, right? And I'm putting that out there because this man of God, right? So obviously God was still like much like here we are now, right? There are still followers of God, even though as a general rule, our country isn't following the Lord, right? But there are still believers kind of scattered all over the world, right? Or all over this country. A lot. So I don't want to just say like a couple, but a lot, but not necessarily like everywhere, right? Like we're not as a nation following the Lord. This is very much the same, right? Ahab has turned from God. He's following other gods. And so this woman grew up in a nation in which they're following other gods, right? She might have heard some stories about Solomon, probably heard some stories about Solomon, but she's not really following the Lord. This man of the Lord comes to her and he says they're in a famine, right? So many of them are starving and a lot of them are dying. Like maybe the husband is she's a widow because he died, right, in trying to get them food. And I'm making that story up. I don't know if that's true. I'm just putting out a maybe, right? Like going contextually with what's happening here. Maybe he died in the famine. And so she's left with her son. And so she goes out and she sees him and he says, hey, can you get me some food? And she's like, can you get me bread? And she's like, I don't even have bread. All I have is flour and some olive oil. And so this is kind of like the point, like we're down to nothing. And they've probably been living on scraps because she says, I'm going to go back. We're going to kind of eat this. And then that's it. We're dead. Like we're going to die. So he then says to her, okay, go do that, but give me some of that first. And I just want to note that the whole reason I kind of came up with this background or shared what I believe is this background with you is because of the faith that it would have taken her to give him this, right? Like she's down to nothing. They're dying. She's got a son. Like I think of myself as a mother, like, am I going to, and thinking about this in my head, right? Am I going to share that little, like, I know that I'm not going to live, or I believe I'm not going to live through this day, but I still have a little bit of something, right? I don't have nothing. I have a little bit of something, just enough for me and my son, right? Like the one, the son that can eventually take care of her, the son that will carry on the name of her husband. So it's not just, now in this day and age, we don't necessarily distinguish between son and daughter, but sons were important for women in order to prosper in the world, right? So in order to have a so-called good life, sons were really important. They took care of their mothers. And so she's now going to take some of the food out of his mouth and give it to this man of God. And so I just want to note that for her, I feel like this is a testament to her. Now, God says that he spoke to her. Well, he says, sorry, my thing keeps flipping, but he says, I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So I'm not sure how that he did that. It doesn't necessarily say he spoke directly to her, but maybe he urged her in order to do this. But that takes a lot of faith in order to be able to do this. And I know I'm pushing a point, but it's kind of what I'm getting at, like the faith that it took her. What in your day-to-day life, what are you giving up? Right? And I'm not trying to use this as a lesson, but I'm just thinking, like, in your own head without saying it out loud, but really thinking about, what am I willing to give up? Even when I hear the Lord asking me to give certain things up, right? Like, even when I hear the Lord saying, go out and do this, go out and start that, go out and give this to somebody, right? Like, am I following that urging, or am I holding back and not listening? So she did. So he says in verse 12, as surely as the Lord your God lives, she replies. And this is another reason why I'm like, she calls him your God, right? She doesn't say our God or my God. Or just the Lord, right? As the Lord God lives. She says the Lord your God. So she recognizes Elijah's a man of God, but she is not, right? A woman of God necessarily. And then Elijah says, don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but make me a small loaf. Verse 14, for this is what the Lord of God Israel says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the land. So at this point, she has to believe that Elijah is, she calls him a follower of the Lord your God, but that Elijah is a man of God, and what he says is true. And then she's going to give this up to him. That's a big ask. So I'm just asking, like, kind of like, what does our faith look like? Verse 17, sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. So she did do that, right? So she gave him everything. Or she gave him some, and then she did have, it said that this prophecy did come true. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally he died. And then she says to Elijah, what have you against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? So was there a point where there was some conviction on her part? And then she's like, but I'm sinful and I'm not following the Lord, and so my son died because of that. And then Elijah goes out and he prays for the son. So it says, give me your son. And then he goes to the Lord and says, Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow that I'm staying with by causing her son to die? Please let this life return to him. And then the Lord heard it, and he brought the boy back to life. Verse 24, here we go with the way that God works. So God was tugging on her heart, right? And then brought this man of God to her, and then performs this massive miracle. And then she follows up and says, now, so it seems like she had faith, but now she says, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth. We have seen all these massive, and we're going to see another one coming later, but we have seen all these massive gestures he does just to get us to have our eyes open, right? Don't close your eyes to his gestures. Don't be foolish and say, like, oh, that's just a coincidence, or oh, that could have happened to anyone, right? Like, keep your hearts and your eyes open. And I'm saying this to probably most of you who listen to me are probably people who say they believe in the Lord, right? And that's awesome. But still keep your hearts open, because sometimes we believe, but the world does what the world does, right? And we don't recognize that the miracles are his and what he does, right? Because he consistently wants to strengthen and steady your faith and bring you closer to him. For those of you who don't believe, right? But maybe you're in this place of like, I don't believe because of people, or I don't believe because I don't like this, or I don't believe because I think science says that, right? Just soften your hearts just to see what it is he's going to show you. He is so willing to show you guys who he is. That's what he wants, right? He doesn't want people to be away from him. That's not his ultimate desire. He's not like, you know what, I want some, but I don't want others. That's not his ultimate desire. Because, and I know that because he shows himself, right? And he says he's going to show himself. Even later when Ahab, who was completely turned away from him, he's like, I'm going to show you that it's me, right? This is what he wants from his people. It's then our choice to say yes or no. All right, moving on for this. Then Elijah prays for rain. So he says, Elijah says to Ahab, oh no, that was too far. Sorry, guys. My wind. I feel like it's a wind tunnel back here. And I know I'm sharing probably stuff that doesn't matter and using up time. It's a wind tunnel back here. And I feel like every season it has gotten windier and windier and windier and windier. Like, what is going on? I mean, what are we going through right now? It's crazy. Can't keep my paper straight. All right, so now we go to this contest on Mount Carmel. All right, after a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go present yourself to Ahab, and I'm going to send rain on the land. So this is exciting because rain is coming back. They've been in famine. But this is a big story. So the famine was severe in Samaria. Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in God. So Obadiah was a palace administrator, so he wasn't like a priest or anything like that. But he still believed in God. He was still devout, which means that he loved the Lord and he worshiped and did all these things, right? To the point where we see that he actually hid prophets. So he was hiding prophets in caves because Ahab was killing those prophets because he was following the prophets of Baal. So he was killing the prophets of the Lord. And so he hid them and protected them. So again, another really big, I might drop, a big important thing that happens because he's following the Lord. All right. And then Ahab says to Obadiah, go through the land and all the springs in the valley. And he's like, maybe we can find, so they're trying to find ways to keep their animals alive, right? Everything is dying. And so they're trying to like go find scraps here and there in order to, and it's funny because they're going out where like other people maybe are eating, but they're going out and they're kind of taking that territory and they're trying to feed their animals. And so when they go out, Obadiah finds Elijah. So they go out in 2 different directions. So Obadiah finds Elijah, he recognizes him, and then he bows down to the ground and he says, is it really you, Elijah? And he says, yes, and then go tell your master that Elijah is here. And Elijah's like, please don't ask me to do that. Do you know what I've already done? I've already had to hide all these prophets. He's good. Do you want him to kill me? Because he's going to kill me. And Elijah says kind of to go out anyway and do it. He says, Obadiah says in verse 12, I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. And then Elijah says that he will stay there, right? So he's like entrusting him and he says, I'm not going to run. I'm going to stay here so Ahab can see me. Verse 15, he says, as the Almighty Lord lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. Right? So he's making a vow. Don't worry, as he lives, I'm going to present myself. We got a lot of vows actually in this chapter. So then Obadiah goes to meet Ahab, and then he says that Elijah is here. And then Ahab's like, is that you, troubler of Israel? So Ahab's not the trouble of Israel. Somehow Elijah is the trouble of Israel. Somehow it's Elijah's fault that famine is on the land. And in verse 18 it says, I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. You have, and this is how they made trouble. You have abandoned the Lord. You've abandoned his commands and followed the Baals. Now summon all the people from Israel to meet me at Mount Carmel. So here's where he does his thing. He summons all of his people, and then he says, verse 20, it says, Ahab sends word throughout Israel, assembles all the prophets, and Elijah goes before the people. So Elijah's kind of like confronting everybody. And he's like, how long are you going to waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. So now he's going to create a contest. Well, God is going to create a contest between the 2 of them. Because it says at one point, like, he does all the things that God told him to do, right? This is how you know that I'm kind of doing all the things that God tells me to do. And the people say nothing. So it just shows you the fear of the, like we are so afraid at times to make proper stands. Like, I feel like we make stands for nonsense and then we don't make stands for things that are really important. Okay. I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 of them. So it's me versus 450 of them. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to summarize it for you. We're going to get bulls, each of us. We're going to cut it into pieces. We're going to lay it on an altar. You're going to call out your God, and you're going to see if your God sets it on fire and takes it as a sacrifice. Then I'm going to call my God, and I'm going to call the Lord, not my God. I'm going to call the Lord, and I'm going to see if he takes this sacrifice. And so they go up, they build these things. 450 priests, so dancing around, they're doing all their rituals, right? They're doing all this stuff. And then Elijah starts to mock him a little bit, like, oh, maybe you need blood on the altar, or maybe, right? Like he's like mocking him. Oh, don't they hear you? And so then they start slicing themselves, like they pull out swords and they're doing this blood ritual and blood dance and doing all this stuff. And I say it like, it's so ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure if you're not a believer, some of the stuff that we do as followers of Christ look ridiculous, or even what they did as Israelites looked ridiculous. But he's mocking them and he's like, go ahead, and then nothing happens, right? No fire, no nothing. So then it's Elijah's turn. So not only does he have all of this stuff in front of him set up kind of like exactly like the 450 prophets have set up, but then he starts to add water. So he's pouring water all over everything, in the trough, everywhere. So like in reality, it shouldn't light on fire. It's so soaked with water, it shouldn't light on fire. Of course we see that it does light on fire. So because then they had called him all day, right? They had called Baal all day. So Elijah took 12 stones, which I think is really important because here we go, 12 tribes of Israel. 12 is like a really important number, which we're starting to see pop its head over and over again. And we see a lot. We see 12, we see 40, we see 7, we see 3. So we're seeing a lot of those numbers like pop up again. If you've been with me from the very beginning, like it started in Genesis and it's continued. All right. And then in verse 36, it says, at the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you are Lord, our God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Massive gesture, huge things. Great way to turn their hearts back to the Lord again, right? Like God has gone, okay, this has gone long enough. Like this is enough. It's time for the famine. And then once the famine comes, and this is what I was saying, I think I said it yesterday. This is what I'm saying, like hardship tends to come before there is revival. We claim that there's going to be a revival over the land. Guess what? I don't think it's hard enough yet, right? It has to be really, really challenging. They're starving. People are dying, right? And then the Lord's like, here we go. Now you know who's in charge, right? So he does all this big gesture, and then he lights everything on fire. It says, then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. So it did you can't miss that this was, I mean, I'm sure someone would go, well, that was just a lightning strike, right? Like, so we don't know. But in this place, thank goodness, it said, then Elijah commanded them. They all believed. It said, when all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. Then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal, don't let anyone get away. And then they killed all of them. So they slaughtered 450 of the prophets of Baal. Baal. And then Elijah says to Ahab, go eat and drink. I hear rain coming. So the famine's going to break. Rain is going to come. And so Ahab takes off, and then Elijah sends his servant to go kind of keep looking, like, go look out, go look out. This is where that 7 comes. He goes 7 times. And on the 7th time, if we think that this is the number of completion, I'm not necessarily saying it is, but I'm saying it kind of makes sense, right? 7 days, right? Which is when the earth was created, and then the earth was complete. And then they use 7 for a whole lot of other things. And here we go 7 times. Everything is complete. He goes out and there's a rain cloud and it's going to come down and rain. So in verse 45, it says, meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose. A heavy rain started falling, and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah. So Ahab goes off in his chariots and horses. And then the Lord came on Elijah, and like he takes off and he sort of runs faster than the chariots. Just an interesting little tidbit. I don't know if there's point and purpose. I'm sure there is, but I don't know it. And then he also goes to Jezreel as well. Now, when he gets there, Ahab tells Jezebel everything. So one of these minor details, right? We don't hear about a lot of the queens, but we hear about Jezebel. Jezebel has come in. She's obviously a strong influence, right? Because when she comes in and he marries her, she was important in her land, comes in, marries her, and she turns everyone, including her husband, towards Baal and to worship him. Now Solomon turned away from the Lord and kind of like put Asherah poles and all this kind of stuff up for a lot of his wives. But we don't necessarily see, it doesn't use the expression that Solomon was worshiping other gods, right? This is one wife, Jezebel, and he started worshiping, and the land all started worshiping her gods, right? So she took a lot of control and a lot of power. And then he comes back and he kind of tells on her. And I feel like he's kind of going home and like tattling, like, can you believe what Elijah did? So he goes in and he tells her, that Elijah killed 450 of the prophets. Now, Ahab doesn't make this vow, but Jezebel makes this vow. Jezebel says, send a messenger to Elijah. May the gods, her gods, deal with me. So she makes a vow. May the gods deal with me ever so severely if by this time tomorrow I don't make your life like one of them. So essentially saying, listen, if I don't kill you tomorrow, that's my vow. My vow is I'm killing you. I'm going to promise to the gods that I'm killing you tomorrow. And if I don't, let them take me instead, because I'm after you. He's scared, and then he runs away. It says he comes to a broom brush, sits down under it, and prays for death. And he's like, I've had enough. Which we would probably say is so crazy. Like, look at all that he's done. And he's just like, I'm exhausted. Like, I've been through a famine. I was with a widow, and we had no food. Like, it's got to be. I went to the king, and I told him this horrible thing. Now I just went and killed 450. Like, it's a lot. All at once, an angel touches him, and she has him get up and eat. Then he goes back to bed, and then she says, again, not she, but an angel says, get up and eat. You have a long trip ahead of you. And then for 40 days and 40 nights, he goes and walks to, it says Mount Horeb, but this is also Mount Sinai. So this is where Moses had heard the 10 Commandments. This is where he met with God, right? Him and Joshua was there as well. So they met literally, Moses met literally with God, saw the glory of the Lord, right? So like this is a really special place, and he goes there. 40 days, 40 nights it takes him to get there. And then the word of the Lord comes to him and says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he's like, I've been zealous for the Lord Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars and put your prophets to death with a sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. It's just heartbreaking. It's devastating. And now the Lord says, go out. And I feel like he's giving him courage, right? He says, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. So at first he just hears him, because it says the word came to him. And then later a voice comes to him. So it makes it, I think, more personal. He says, go out there. And then there's this wind and there's all this stuff. But it says, this is an interesting passage. I'm not really fully connecting with it, because it says like the wind came, but the Lord wasn't in it. It says an earthquake came, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. Fire came, but Lord was not in the fire. Right? Then a gentle whisper comes. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. So were these all representations of the Lord, and Elijah was just standing there looking? But it says the Lord wasn't in it. Maybe it wasn't. He was getting whipped up. So I'm not really sure. I think he's offering comfort to Elijah, but I'm not 100% certain. So then he asks again, what are you doing here? Elijah essentially repeats himself, and the Lord says, then the Lord said to him, so I feel like he's then talking to him because he kind of hears that voice. He says, go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus. So he's giving him another job. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Aram had Ben-Hadad as their king. He teamed up with Judah to fight against Israel. Not sure if you guys remember that story. It was a couple of days ago. So Ben-Hadad is the king in Aram, which is not a tribe of Israel. It's on the outside. So it is, I think, what is now Syria. So it is on the outside of their land. So changing that king, Jehu, son of Nimshi, over Israel. So changing that king. This is not, he's telling him to make a new king, not Ahab. And then have Elisha be the next prophet, right? So Elijah is the prophet right now. So Elisha will be the new prophet. And he said, and then those people are going to kind of handle business. He says, then yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel. So again, there's some comfort. You are not the only one. You feel like the only one? You are not the only one. There are 7,000 people left in Israel that follow me, that love the Lord. You might not see them. They're scattered all over, but they're there, right? So have some courage because those people are still there. You're not the only one. All right, then Elijah goes down from there and he finds Elisha. So at this point, by the way, I told you guys he was way up in Israel, and he comes down to Beersheba, which is down in Judah, right? And then he goes to Mount Horeb. So he traveled very far. So he traveled a huge distance. So Elijah goes from there and finds Elisha, who's plowing with 12 yokes of oxen, and the yoke is there's two of them. So he's traveling with 12 of them, and he's kind of at the last one. But again, like I feel like there's power behind 12. I'm sure it's deeper than I have time to go in now, but I feel like there's power behind that 12. Again, just things to note. And then Elisha, he goes over, he kisses them, and Elisha's like, okay, I'm going to go tell, let me just give me a second to go tell everybody. And then I just note this, and he says, go back. Elijah says, go tell them. And then he says, what have I done to you? So I think he's like sad that he is making Elisha a prophet when Elisha was just there plowing his field, right? And now Elisha has to go through a lot of the stuff that Elijah has been going through. But Elisha follows him willingly. And then we go down to 1 Kings 20. So this is the last chapter. It says, now Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, so right now he's still the king because Elijah hasn't changed the kingship yet. He musters his army and he's going to attack Israel. So he's going to attack Ahab. And it says, funny enough, they don't say Ahab, but they say the king of Israel answers. So he's like, listen, I'm going to come in there. I'm going to take a whole bunch of your stuff. And including your wives, by the way. And Ahab's like, okay, come in and take it. So I assume he was scared. He had 32 kings with him. So it wasn't just the king of Aram. It was 32 other kings with him. And so Ahab says, okay, or the king at that time, I think it's Ahab, says, okay. And then he's like, all right, well, now just so you know, not only am I going to do that, but now I'm going to come in and I'm going to take everything. And there's going to be like nothing left. You're going to have absolutely nothing. And then Ahab's like, I can't have nothing. So he goes and he consults his elders and he says, what do I say? And they said, you can't give in to that command. And so Ahab then says to him, okay, I'll do the first half, but I can't do the second half. And so then the king of Aram, Ben-Hadad, is like, all right, well, then we're attacking. So just be prepared for us. So he boasts and he says, they're going to attack. He says, prepare to attack. So then meanwhile, a prophet comes to Ahab, the king of Israel, and says, this is what the Lord says. So here we go, our next massive miracle that God does. Do you see that army? I'm going to give it into your hand today. And then, here we go, you're going to know that I'm the Lord. You're turning these other gods, but I'm going to hand it over to you, and then you're going to know it's me, right? Make no mistake. And then talk about bearing responsibility. Every single thing he does after this, there's no question and no doubt that this is the Lord, because he sends a prophet to him. And then Ahab's like, who's going to do it? And he says, your junior commanders are going to do it. And he says, who's going to start? And he says, you guys are going to start it. So meanwhile, Ben-Hadad and all of his people they're all getting drunk. So there's 32 kings. They're all partying and getting drunk. Essentially, like, Ahab surrendered. He's afraid. And so they're like, this is nothing, right? We got this. And then so while they're drinking and partying, someone goes out and he says, hey, we see people are coming from the tribe of Israel. And and Ben-Hadad was like, okay, so two options. One, if they're coming in peace, kill them. Two, if they're coming for war, kill them. So he's not even really giving them any options. I'm sorry, take them alive. Sorry, if they're coming in war, take them alive. If they're coming in peace, take them alive. And so essentially he's like, just take him and bring him over here. Well, surprise, they go out, and then the Israelites wind up slaughtering them. And Ben-Hadad runs away. So Ben-Hadad takes off. So it says in verse 22, and then there's huge, they kill a lot of these kings and a lot of their men, right? There's huge losses on their side. Verse 22, it says, afterward, the prophet came to the king of Israel. So they won this battle. Comes to the king of Israel and says, strengthen your position and see what must be done, because next spring, the king of Aram will attack you again. So this is where we're ending today. The Lord has lifted essentially up Ahab, right? He has given him strength, and now he's giving him a command. He's telling him what to do for next time. Be prepared, right? So I did this, and now you got to be prepared for next time. So we're going to see what happens. I'm sure we're going to continue on this story. We're going to see what happens tomorrow, probably. I hope we'll see more of what's happening and then what's going on in the life of Elijah. But that's where we're ending for today. If this was a blessing to you guys, I would love if you liked it. I want you to share it, and I want you to subscribe to the channel so it can come to you. I know listening every day is a lot, but I hope that you are reading. Even if you take 5 years, I don't care how long it takes you to read. Keep reading your Bible. Keep coming back. Keep growing in your faith in the Lord, and pray for you to see him in your daily life. And then I will see you guys tomorrow.